I run music festivals and I'm the founder and festival director of Love Supreme Festival in Sussex.
I'm one of the co-founders and editor here at Tortoise.
I'm one of the co-founders of Tortoise.
I'm an editor and partner at Tortoise Media.
It's actually the creative collaboration of a team of people who put on great music festivals and a team of people that you know because you backed us on Kickstarter before, building a new type of newsroom.
I think there's really a thirst for knowledge and discourse, but there's also a thirst for feeling and experience. And bringing together an ideas festival with a music festival, I think, can help satisfy that desire.
It is going to be a completely different festival. Ours is really built around the idea that something is fundamentally changing in the way in which we all live. We're much more activist, we're much more passionate. And so what we want to do is give people a chance to really engage with the people, the politicians, the business leaders, the cultural icons who are shaping the way we live, to engage with them in conversation, not just sit and listen, but really engage with them. And in the way in which you do at a festival for music, you're part of the show. We want that to be the case when it comes to ideas.
Challenges ahead of us like AI, climate change, population growth, belonging and what it means to be part of a community.
Beautiful surroundings, great food, great artists, bars, the ability to camp or glamp.
Definitely glamping.
A mixture of, if you like, fireside chats and a big top, and we'll have a ThinkIn village at Kite, which means that we'll have a series of tents and simultaneous think-ins going on.
It's a celebration of great ideas, and then it goes on to a really great party at night with some amazing music.
It's really the love child of Hay and Latitude.
TED Talks meets So Far Sounds. The most important thing about who's involved in the festival is you, the Kickstarter community. As we shape the ideas for the festival, as we shape the music for the festival, your input will be more important than James's. So as a founder of the festival, you will always get the best price tickets, you will always hear about the festival first, but even when we're sold out, if you've been a founder, you'll always be able to get tickets.
Help us to make sure that Kite flies.
Oh dear, the fun we have. Anyway, yeah, okay. My name is Matt Dancona. I am an editor and partner at Tortoise, which is a slow media platform.
Futures by Tortoise is a reboot of a 1920s and early 30s series called Today and Tomorrow, in which a massive collection of writers, artists, scientists and other subject experts talked about a particular topic, the state of it at that particular time, and then went on to predict what would happen in that area into the future.
Well, Futures came to us as an idea from Max Saunders, who's an English professor.
Who spent about 10 years working on the original series and thought it would be an amazing idea to update it for the 21st century.
So that was an exciting editorial challenge, was to seek out the best and the brightest writers, and not just the most established. We also want to showcase new talent and to start off with 5 launching in the middle of next year, 2020, and keep going.
And it can't just be one vision, we've got to have an inclusive, diverse set of visions. This is about changing the conversation, it's about creating the future we want.
What are some of your predictions? What do you think?
I don't do predictions.
Help us bring Futures to life. Pledge to fund the first 5 essays by 5 brilliant authors. Head to unbound.com/books/futures.
I'm keen to start on time for reasons that will become apparent. I'm Mary P. Mills. I'm a partner and editor here at Tortoise. Welcome to Tortoise. Welcome to our newsroom, if you haven't been before, and welcome to a special Monday night ThinkIn with Mary Beard. Thank you. Bit more of that. I know I see some familiar faces, but I know some people haven't been before, so I should start explaining what a ThinkIn is. It's not a panel event. It's not me and Mary talking in a fireside chat for an hour or so. It's a forum to hear from you, as well as Mary, and hear from as many voices in the room as possible. So that's where you come in. We do have one rule, which is no questions, because we tend to find people hide behind a question when they have something to say. However, we do relax it a little bit for Monday night guests. So if you have something to say, don't hide behind a question is all we're trying to say. A bit of housekeeping before we get going. We love you talking about us on social media. Please do, but not during the event. So turn off your phone so they don't ring if you haven't already. Look at Mary reaching for her phone. You can talk about us on social media as much as you like. You're being filmed, just for the members that couldn't make it here. So these little cameras that move around, these little robots are cameras, and these little wires hanging down are mic'd. This is Agatha. She's our timer who makes her way across the screen for an hour. Please keep an eye on her if you have something to say. Stick your hand in the air, say your name, and please do talk loudly, because we are naturally mic'd, and this is a very full room, and we definitely want to hear what you have to say. And I should also add that afterwards, Mary will be doing signings of her books in our green room back there, but she does have to get back to tweet the shock of the nude for the BBC at 9 o'clock. So I would ask you to move quickly in your signings as much as possible. And if you want a photo, someone else can take it while you're talking to her or similar, but just be aware of that. So now it's up to me to introduce Mary Beard, Professor of Classics at the University of Cambridge, TV star, celebrated feminist, Twitter celebrity, all-round national treasure, who Prospect once just voted the 7th most influential figure, pipped to the post by Pope Francis and a few others. The New Yorker described her as learned but accessible, and The Guardian celebrated her as swearing magnificently and often. So I will look forward to hearing some of that tonight on your third glass of wine. I'm gonna, no one's counting. I'm going to start by exposing you, so to speak, by talking about your new show, The Shock of the Nude, which is on tonight. Going to the first slide, this is you posing as a subject for Catherine Goodman for that show. Would you tell us about that experience and your sort of attempt to democratise the news?
Yeah, when we planned this show, which was several years ago, I said right at the very beginning, there's no way you could now be a presenter who goes around talking about the power relations between the model and the artist, the male gaze, about the vulnerability of the woman who is painted or drawn, you know, and be a sort of 65-year-old academic lady who just kind of kept her Mac on, really. And this actually presented the BBC with some difficulties, because they saw that point, and I was very, very convinced that it was right. I didn't want the reviews to say, this is new Sister Wendy, she's just keeping her habit on and talking slightly raunchily about everybody else taking their clothes off. What happened was that the excellent director, female director, decided that we could best do this in a way that wasn't simply naff. It may end up being simply naff. It's next week, not this week. By concentrating on the drawing that was made. So you see me posing, but you really concentrate on the drawing. And as this went on, it started off with me thinking about this very much from the point of view of the power relations of the presenter to the audience and to the other participants. came to be, as we developed the programme, also to do with whose bodies do we see. And so this comes in part of the programme where we think about what tends to get excluded from things we call the nude. And there, the answer is, anyone over about 45. And so it plays into that sense of let's look at a different kind of body and what difference does that make. Okay. So I feel, there will be people, I dread to think what Camilla Long is going to say in the Sunday Times. I just dread to think, and I'm just not going to read it. And there'll be people who will say, oh, God, did you have to? Oh, But I couldn't have lived with myself not doing that.
Okay, well done to you. So I don't want to bring up difficult memories, but in this process, in the publicity process, you described the nude as soft porn for the elite, and I know all morning you've been on BBC defending that quote. Just try and explain to people what you were trying to say by that. And I'm sorry.
I didn't actually. I have never said, to my knowledge, that the nude is soft porn for the elite. What I have said is that unless you are prepared to ask the question of whether the nude is soft porn for the elite, whatever your answer turns out to be, and I think my answer is it probably mostly isn't, but unless you answer that question or ask that question, you haven't started, And I think that, it's been an interesting experience of watching kind of what happens down the journalistic food chain. It starts off when Mary Beard asks whether this is soft porn for the elite. The next headline, 3 steps down, it's Mary Beard brands new soft porn for the elite. And, no, she didn't. But I think what we do in the programme is actually try to kind of help people to think, and help me to think, honestly, about how you go about thinking about how you make that difference, how you put the difference in. And we do that with Courbet's Origin of the World in the Musée d'Orsay. And, you probably know it. It's a painting which is a close-up, basically, of female genitalia of a woman with hardly any limbs and no head. And if it were a photograph, it would be in a pawn shop. P-O-R-N, not P-A-W-N, pawn shop. Sorry. And what is very interesting about going to the Musée d'Orsay is you can see their anxiety about whether this is porn or not. And so it's in this very kind of big gold frame which says art masterpiece. It's in the gallery. It's called The Origin of the World. We don't know who gave it that title, but as you will see actually tonight if you watch, if it was entitled, Jeanette's Pussy, it would not be on the walls of the Musée d'Orsay. And the website is really worth going into and looking at. And you can see what their problem is. They say, look, the delicate amber colour scheme keeps it this side of the boundary between art and porn. And you think, so it's all about the colour? No, I wouldn't knock it. I wouldn't like to be a website writer for the Musée d'Orsay trying to present Courbet's Origin of the World. But it's an absolute, extreme but classic case of how we do all kinds of things to put one picture in one category and one picture in another. And I thought, to finish, I'm going on too long, I thought that I'm sort of standing up for those people we usually ridicule, who go to art galleries and, the average gallery goer hears somebody saying, God, it's all a bit like porn, isn't it? Really? And we think, oh, how unsophisticated, how Philistine. And I think in some ways they're asking their answer might be wrong, but they're asking the right question, and often the committed gallery goer simply fails to ask that question. I think quite a lot of upmarket journalists too, very resistant to that question.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I just want to show another a nude which you wrote and talked about in Civilisation and is also in Shock of the New. Now, this was the Shock of the New. This was the first life-size female nude, the Aphrodite of, I'm going to say this wrong, Knidos. Thank you. Was this as shocking at the time as, say, Duchamp's urinal or Tracy Emin's bed?
Yeah. But I think we now tend to look at things like this, generalising we, and think that's classical art. That's, you can see hundreds of those lined up along gallery walls. We actually don't pay them very much attention. And we tend, I think, to imagine that they were completely taken for granted in the ancient world too. This was hugely controversial in the 4th century BC. I mean, Praxiteles, the sculptor, offered it to the city of Kos, and they said not bloody likely. They didn't want a woman with no clothes on, a goddess, Aphrodite with no clothes on. And eventually it was taken by the city of Knidos on what's now the Turkish coast. And it was a perilous and risky decision. Turned out to be the right one because it became their tourist attraction. And it's on every ancient fridge magnet from produced in Knidos, a big industry. But it never ceased to be difficult. It never ceased to be difficult and edgy. And there is a very famous story which we refer to in both programmes very briefly, of a young man in the city of Knidos who quotes, all this is in quotes, falls in love with the statue, gets locked up with her overnight, rapes her. I mean, she doesn't consent, so forces himself on her, leaves the mark of his semen on her thigh, which you could go on seeing. We know that the tourist guides in Knidos pointed to the mark on the leg of the Aphrodite, and then throws himself off a cliff. And I think when I first read that story, my students certainly, at first you think, well, that's a weird story, isn't it? The ancients tell weird stories about sculpture. But for me, it became really an interesting indication that, although in a very different idiom, these storytellers in the ancient world, they were going into the male gaze too. This was a story about how dangerous sculpture is, how it is part of the locus of desire, and actually somehow there is transgression. The guy doesn't, come away and say, great. He kills himself. And it seems to me that very much sets the scene, although we kind of modulate it differently, for how people have talked about the nude in the West ever since. It's never been something that people were entirely, utterly comfortable with. I mean, we're always partly comfortable with it. We expect them to, we expect galleries of art to be full of bare breasts. We expect, but we're also anxious about whose body and who looks and which bits. So it's a kind of very much in tension between taking for granted and real anxiety.
Okay. I'd love to go back to, just the fact that you said the whole soft porn for the elite, and it just caused all this furore, and you ended up getting loads of abuse again. And, I was struck when I was thinking about you coming that, I found this tweet, the next slide, which is from 2013. You will be very familiar with this. A really horrible tweet calling you a filthy old slut.
Oh, right.
Your vagina is disgusting.
Horrible.
Horrible. And then slide 4, the next slide is, this is a tweet. There's been some obsession with her looks. I mean, this is 7 years have passed. Yes. Nothing changes. You get this on a sort of weekly basis. It must be really difficult to live with. And do you feel you sort of can't win either way. And, you know, in Women in Power, you talk about, well, when it comes to silencing women, Western culture has had thousands of years of practice.
Yes.
Is this another attempt to silence you?
Yeah, I mean, I think these two probably quite different. Oliver, who I've since come to know, who wrote the first tweet.
Are you still, so for those who don't know this story, this is a really interesting story, and I feel you should tell it.
I went on the Jeremy Vine show to talk about tweeting, actually. And as I was waiting to do something else in Radio Cambridge, I got my phone out, and there was Oliver, as I now call him, Oliver, because we've become friends. Saying, you know, your vagina smells like cabbage or whatever he said. And it started out as a very good news story because I said, I think it might be an idea just to take that down. Nothing happened. Then somebody said, I know his mother. I'll get her to take it down. I don't quite remember what happened, but it became a sort of very nice way of how do you deal with a troll? Get onto their mum, you know. It then didn't get so nice because one newspaper decided to follow Oliver up, and his name, Oliver Rawlings, was up there, and they kind of really harassed him. I mean, he had tweeted very nastily. He was on holiday, a late adolescent, and probably drunk, right? And you know, I look at my students and I think they do silly things when they're drunk, which they probably regret. He then got kind of harassed. He came to Cambridge to apologise after all this, and everything looked fine.
Took you out to lunch?
Took me out to lunch. It was very nice.
Hope somewhere fancy.
It wasn't particularly fancy. It was in the pub down the road. And everything seemed kind of ended until he got offered a job. And he was offered a job and he accepted it. And then they Googled him and they found his tweets. So at this point, I wrote to them. It was with a company who worked as a subsidiary for, on contract to, the BBC. I wrote and said that they should just ignore this. This was over. You know, he'd apologised. It was a very silly thing to do, but you know, I had drawn a line under it. They still didn't give him the job.
They still didn't? Even
though they had offered it. He'd been formally offered it. I then said to him, the only way to deal with this is to be up straight and up front. And so I said, I'll be your reference, because the only person they can take this, we've got to be open about this, and the only person who has an authority to speak is me. So I did a reference and you know, saying exactly what had happened and how he'd been very silly, but he'd done the decent thing. Most trolls don't take you out to lunch, you know, and apologise and send you Christmas presents. Things like this.
What did he send you for Christmas?
Chocolates. And he got a job, and I was in touch with him up to about a year or so ago, and I haven't heard from him for a year. So in a way, it has a happy ending.
But you can't do that with everyone.
No, you can't, and I don't. You know.
And you've talked about the sort of
Dolomite. I didn't much like, but I do try to, on a selective basis, and you get a nose for this, to write back and say, look, I'm sorry, I'm not sure that this is quite fair, you know, and to be very, very polite and try to take them on. You know, Oliver was a great success. And, you know, Oliver certainly won't. I mean, I suspect he doesn't have a Twitter account now. I get, I suppose, about a 30% success rate of people saying, oh, look, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't really, you know, I didn't mean it. I shouldn't have said that. I had a wonderful one quite recently from somebody, I can't remember what they were going at me for. And I said, look, that's not quite fair. And the reply came instantly back saying, I live in Glasgow, I'm an ex-policeman, I've just had a heart attack, and I really like history, and we have a history club at my local pub, will you come? You know, so you move from, you know, you completely fucking tosser, to would you come and talk at my history society? And, you know, I think, you know, everybody says stupid things from time to time.
And am I right in thinking you don't particularly, if someone said to you, oh, you know, just don't engage, that's another way of telling you to be quiet.
Yeah, when it first started, everybody says, don't block them and don't reply. And look, I think you have to find out what you want to do yourself. You know, I think nobody can tell you how to deal with these people. You have to find out what you feel comfortable with. So I wouldn't recommend what I do necessarily, but I do think that you get all this stuff, you block them, and then you think, well, this is leaving the bullies in charge of the playground. And I've just been silenced, but in a different way. And it felt much, much better when I started to reply to them. You know, I felt that I was not being shut up. Now, you have to learn, and it takes you a bit of time, that you should never, ever lose your rag. You should never get cross. You know, it's taken me several years to know that if I feel like getting cross, don't tweet.
Step away from the computer.
Step away from the computer. Because the only way you can manage it is if you are just... I'm afraid I don't agree with you, but please do watch the programme.
I could go on for ages, but I know that there will be gentlemen at the front. Would you just say your name?
Patrick Spencer.
Hi, Patrick.
And I have engaged with Mary on Twitter, but in a more benign way. It was me that pointed out that the manhole covers in Rome were advertising your book. I followed quite a lot of political things through the Brexit debate and the election, and now I'm cutting those out, unfollowing people that deal with that, blocking a few, largely not because they're talking to me, but I don't really want to hear what they've got to say, and I'm linking into many more on arts and culture and things like that, and I have to say my blood pressure has gone down, and life is more joyous. But so I'm really torn, and I'm interested in what other people might think. Is it a force for good? Is it a force for bad, or is it just a force?
I don't think you can. I don't feel you can blame the medium.
You don't feel you can blame, because this is what I was sort of just talking to you about before. You don't feel the root of the problem is in the medium or the way the medium has no, there's no recourse, there's no...
The root of the problem is in us, right? And, I mean, in a kind of slightly strange way, I feel rather grateful to know what these, not all blokes, but I think often blokes are saying. You know, I used to go around in blissful ignorance, I think, of what people were saying, either about me, or, you know, about the world in, you know, when it got near closing time in the pub. And now I know that. I don't think, they haven't just started saying it because they could say it on Twitter. They've always been saying that, but now I can see. Now, in some ways, ignorance was bliss, in a sense. But I now know what the enemy looks like. I used to think, oh gosh, you know, the world has become a less sexist place. No, it hasn't. It's just now I can now see that it hasn't. And I also think it's a very young medium. And, you know, I often think that when I was at school, we spent 2 lessons, I think, learning how to write a telegram. The thing, this was, 50 years ago? And we would sit down and we would have to, I remember it was a very academic girls' school, and clearly there were other messages being inculcated here. We had to write a telegram to accept a scholarship at Oxford or Cambridge.
That's not your average school, is it?
Gosh, and now I would think that was terrible, but it stuck, it really stuck. And so this kind of medium is so, if you think we were trained in that. Now I hope, and I think to some extent it's true, that kids are now being taught, as I was taught, scholarship, accept, stop. I hope that they're being taught how to read a tweet, how to reply to a tweet, You know, it's another form of rhetoric.
That's interesting because I don't think they are, but you would say they should be.
Well, I know they are. I'll tell you where I think they are, because I've looked a bit at this online, and they are, English as a foreign language courses do teach you how to tweet.
Really?
Which I think is really interesting, because they know that one of the things you need to be able to do if you're dealing with English and it's not your first language is to know how you tweet. But I suspect you're right that at least in the exam syllabus, they're not being taught. People are not being taught about.
But you think
the
that's an
rules of Britain.
essential modern life skill?
I think it's pretty much a modern life skill.
Okay.
I mean, there's loads of essential modern life skills, and the problem about school is that there are too many essential skills to learn in a school career. But I think it's a bloody good one.
Gentleman here.
Hi.
Do you say your name?
Keith Carter Harris.
Hi, Keith.
Can I switch the topic just a little bit? You've become a more general commentator on wider issues such as just now social media, and this derives from your long experience as an academic in a particular scholarly field. And I suppose, I'm not sure it's an answerable question, but I suppose that's okay, given the rules of this thing.
It works for us.
My son is 16 years old, classics obsessed, thinking about Cambridge, even though he's dyslexic and it's going to be really tough. Currently designing a Roman shield. His birthday present for us, his birthday is 2 days' time, is 11 square foot of deer hide to make the shield. But for him, he is someone for whom the Roman era, and he's learning Greek too, the classical era, is a kind of escape. It's a different world. It's not that it's escapism, it's a different world, and its otherness, I think, is the thing that attracts him in this world in and of itself. I wonder, do you see a tension in your own work then? I am actually asking a question between being someone who's branched out from the classics and popularised it and made it relatable with preserving that kind of otherness.
Yeah, I mean, I do particularly. Media, the mostly print media I'm talking about here, but also television a bit, tends to want to make an equation. Well, they want to know about the classics in order to say that Donald Trump is like the Emperor Nero. So they're looking for off-the-peg comparisons. And I think that someone in my position, but I think, my colleagues too, have a big... That's the big battle. To try and say, look, the ancient world is not like us. Trump is not like Nero. It's what is important about the ancient world is that it is both like us and fundamentally different. And it's, for me, I think, when I'm teaching my students, in terms of modern jargon, I think of it as a kind of, it's a safe space. Big issues that can often be very difficult to talk about head-on to a group of, mainly, not only, but 18 to 21-year-olds. So if you think about racism and slavery, I think the difference of the kind of the way that is defined in the ancient world helps us actually talk about our own different versions of that. And of course, we've inherited a hell of a lot of ways of not thinking, but of expressing ourselves, in terms of liberty, citizenship, democracy, or whatever from antiquity. But we're always on the outside of it. Religion too, I think you can have very good discussions about the persecution of the Christians in a way that you could not have that kind of free-floating discussion about, let's say, Islamophobia. And so I think it's a place where you can talk.
Bruce, I was taught by you long time ago, so I'm a classicist, so I thought I'd come along, and I completely agree on the disruptive point. So I think my children are now coming to, well, some of them have gone through university, but some of them are coming up to that age of making those choices. And I think the difference now is that classics is seen as a nice place to go, whereas apparently I did it because it was not fashionable, not the place to go, and it taught you how to not be disruptive. And some of the teaching that you got around classics was disrupting your thinking. So if you thought that the way we've done banking and finance was always the same, go and talk to a certain Dr. Millett at Downing and he'll tell you the other way. Yeah. And that created a whole industry here called peer-to-peer lending. So for me, that's the power of classics, is it teaches you not to think that what we do now is somehow at the end of some path.
In some ways, I think it teaches you. There are other subjects that do this. I mean, it's just that classics is there, ready, and we can use it. It sort of teaches you to be an anthropologist of yourself. I think it kind of enables you to find a position in which to critique now, and that comes in various forms. But I mean, one of the things that always startles students is when you say the Greek and Roman penal system had no role for prison. They simply would not have understood the idea that our preferred form of punishment was banging people up. And that opens up a different way of thinking quite easily. I think I think classics. There's loads of things of intense academic and narrow interest which I think are worth studying, but it's a wonderful lever for exposing ourselves as well as the ancients, and quite quick, actually.
I'm going to go to the lady here and then the gentleman there.
Lizzie Conda. I really enjoyed the...
Say that again, sorry?
Lizzie Conda.
Lizzie, and would you talk...
I will. I really enjoyed the conversations this morning that you had with Rembrandt on the BBC. And I think the thought that came to me after that was the idea of agency, and that is it the model or is it the painter who has agency in those? And taking that on, I was also looking at lots of noise today about Super Bowl, and if you look at those costumes, actually who has agency? Is it J-Lo? Where is agency these days in art, both old, ancient and modern?
No, I think that's extremely interesting, and since doing that start the week, and then I did an interview on Radio 5 Live, which has a slightly different audience, about the idea of the model and how you... I mean, that's, as I was saying in answer to Maripy, one of the reasons I wanted to take my kit off, as they keep saying, take your kit, and be a model. I wanted to explore that, that relationship. I mean, in a way that, it was a very easy way to explore it because I had a perfect choice and I could always have said no, thank you. But it did raise those issues, and I've had a number of loads of tweets actually today from life models talking about their sense of empowerment within that kind of relationship, and others who don't. And that's in one of the reasons I think that exploring the idea of the nude, and we imagine the artist is usually clothed and the viewer is usually clothed, is that it does help us open up different answers to the question of who has agency here. And the answer is not always predictable. And, male artists often, of course, claim, this is a problem, that the model has the agency. Just like ancient poets said that it was their entirely exploited beloved who had the agency. And yet, to some extent, you've got to, there are women who are saying, I have got a lot out of this, I have enjoyed it, I feel that I have, in a sense, reposition myself this way. And I think one shouldn't dismiss those claims as if somehow it is only the male gaze and the passive desired woman that is a way of explaining it.
Thank you. The gentleman here and then the lady in the front row.
Jason Missy, can I change the subject totally in your role as a professor at Cambridge University? So I've just been through the process of taking my son to Cambridge, which he applied to and then decided he didn't want to go. And he didn't want to go because, as a boy from a North London comprehensive, he said, "This is alien to me. It doesn't, the people are totally different to me. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel like it was society as I recognise it. I want to go to somewhere which is a bit more," he felt, more democratic. Now within that, there's two questions really. One is Oxbridge or Cambridge, in your experience, effectively reflecting society? And secondly, does it have too much influence on society and on a society that it may not actually reflect?
I think that's a very good question, and I'm sad about your son, actually.
So am I.
And I shall preface this by saying I'm the first person in my family to get a degree, so I might now look like I'm an old Oxbridge type. Nobody in my family got a degree before. I think it's very hard. Clearly, the position we're in is not right. So nobody is going to say, when they look at even the kind of modulated version of the statistics, that could be good. And I suppose I've spent a lot of my life trying to do something about that. I don't mean this to sound simply self-defensive when I say that it's always been very convenient in a world in which we know that that achievement, success and attainment is already demonstrably different between the privileged and the unprivileged at the age of 4. It becomes very convenient to blame Oxbridge at the top. I think we have in this country, I would ban Inspector Morse, because we have a huge fetish of Oxbridge. There are 2 good universities, and there's lots of other good universities in this country, and I'm sure your son's going to one. And there is something about everything that we dislike about the British class system that somehow makes Oxbridge kind of a protected but also exotic and strange species. Doesn't do any good to the universities. It doesn't do much good to the kids. I find myself, partly because I was, I'm what in America they call first gen, because I was first gen, I find myself, sad and a bit disappointed that potential students make the kind of decision that your son did, because in part I think the Oxbridge rituals, if you see them more productively, are quite levelling. There isn't anybody, well, there might be a couple of Boris Johnsons, but by and large, there isn't anybody.
That's enough though, isn't it?
We've got one, finally. You hear people say, I don't know which knife and fork to use. Nobody knows what knife and fork to use. This is not that. It's not as if there are some people who are already acculturated into this. Nobody is, and to some extent, I think that its weird traditions are paradoxically levelling. Now, I think that's an optimistic way of seeing it. I would stick by it. Your eyes are constantly opened. A very long time ago, I did a reality TV programme called Jamie Oliver's Dream School. I remember that. Anyway, God, it was a long time ago, and I was supposed to teach. Jamie had took a group of failed 15-year-olds, and they were going to be taught by people with no training at teaching 15-year-olds, but who were kind of clever. And it was going to kind of open their eyes, as if somehow they're hard-working teachers had not been able to. And what most of the decent people on the programme learned in the teaching was that it was bloody hard being a teacher. But at a certain point, some of the kids said, and they were a diverse group, we think Cambridge is just something that is utterly not for us. And I said, come and see it, just come. And through their eyes, because my eyes were opened, because I went round Cambridge with a group of largely black British students, not entirely, but largely black British. And I thought I'd been saying to these kids, you'd feel, we would make you feel welcome. And I think in some ways I did make them feel welcome, but they didn't see anybody like them. We went into my library. Now, that's changing. It is changing. It's slow. And I hope we can do better. But, I mean, I'd like to say to your son that if he doesn't come, it makes our job all the more difficult. And, every time somebody gets on the radio and says, Oxford and Cambridge discriminate against whoever we're supposed to discriminate against, and there are many, it makes it harder to recruit from those groups. And problem. Big problem, but it's about the British, it's about the racism and classism of Britain.
But sorry, just to come back, he found it anachronistic. He just found the buildings, the names, the traditions, everything just didn't tally with somebody from, admittedly, middle class, privileged, North London background, but he just didn't think it tallied with.
I'd like to have sat down with him and given him a bit of a talking to about that, because radical, new, really right on stuff often flourishes better amongst the dreaming spires than it does in concrete blocks. But I wish I could have met him.
The two ladies at the front here, the glasses first.
Hi, I'm Elaine Norman-Davis. This question sort of sat more easily with the previous, not this question, but the previous one to do with life drawing. I've been a life drawing teacher for 10 years.
Oh, brilliant.
And looking at the drawing of you, and I haven't seen the programme, but it's rather a defensive pose that you've struck. I have never in all my time as a life drawing teacher actually seen a model sit down and take that pose. Were you asked to pose like that, or did you choose to? And would you have felt uncomfortable being slightly more in a slightly more open pose?
I was allowed to do whatever I liked. The best one, and the one that I like the most, is rather different from that, and it's me lying down with a bottle of beer. And I guess I didn't feel defensive. If you'd said to me, "Are you feeling defensive?" then I would probably say no. If you say to me, "That looks like a very controlled, self-concealing pose," I would have to plead guilty.
Yeah.
It was quite interesting because we did 3 sessions, and 2 it was me and Catherine Goodman on our own. And it was actually, for me, it was lovely because we listened to Claire Tomlin's audio book of her biography of Charles Dickens, and I thought, this is heaven, It then changed slightly when we had the film crew, because we had by that stage built up some kind of relationship, and then you have the film crew, and I hope none of the film crew ever get a chance to listen to this, because they should be able to speak for themselves, and I shouldn't speak for them. But of course, film crew that I've been working with for months, I thought were more embarrassed than I was. So there was a kind of a strange dynamic when we actually filmed it. But I mean, you're absolutely right. I think if you ask me, did you enjoy it? I got a lot out of it. Does your do your poses give away the fact that maybe you were not giving everything? I mean, you have to be right. Yeah, I look at this and I agree.
I think it's very brave of you to have done it. It had a very large audience, like compared to most life models. So,
I think it was brave. I mean, there's going to be people in, the reviews and online who are going to say, "What a bloody exhibitionist thing to do! Can't you just keep, can't you keep your kit on?" There's going to be people who say, "We don't want to see bodies like yours." Now, that one I can answer. I'm going to say, right, okay, tough. We're going to think about bodies, and I think there's quite interesting stuff now coming out, which, and you may be part of this, which says, look, if you let kids, we go on about idealised Photoshop bodies. If you get human kids drawing a human model with all the bits of extra flesh that aren't photoshopped out, actually it's one small step in the direction of a bit less kind of body image problem.
Well, I've been drawing nude since the age of 12, and I actually would say on average, there is not an average nude that I have drawn. I have drawn people of all shapes and sizes, both genders, with all sorts of physical imperfections. So for me, it wouldn't be a normal thing. But it wouldn't be unusual to be drawing somebody like yourself or like myself or whatever. So yes, I think it's really good that it's come onto the television.
And the programme, the second programme, not tonight's, ends when we talk to a trans model who talked about how important it was seeing, and they call themselves him. So he was very keen to say that seeing myself drawn by other people and then seeing myself talk about on the television was really important. And, I think it's that, in some ways, this, I know that tweets aren't representative, but, when people say, oh, you're not the shape for we don't want to see you, then I think I was bloody well right to do it. Because actually the more we see that there are different sorts of bodies, underneath people of all sorts of different types and external clothed appearance, the better. And Jared, the trans model, I think was with me. He said it was very, it was really good to both be a model and to talk about being a model. But, I can't help but say, you're right.
The lady in the scarf and the gentleman back there.
Hello, I'm Danielle, and I actually have comment about Twitter. I joined Twitter a while back, and it was actually just to promote a television show that had been cancelled, and it became a quite beautiful medium to have dialogue with people I would never otherwise have met, have been now to conventions through these friends from abroad. But what struck me was, especially now with the election coverage and analysis, is that while you can have lots of human trolls on Twitter who you can find the person behind the tweet and get through to them because at core it is a rational actor with a set of values you can appeal to, there of course are the non-rational, the hijacking influences of bots or perhaps manufactured tweets, and given their volume, how on earth does one begin to think about their place?
What's your name again?
Danielle.
Danielle. Did everyone hear Danielle? She was okay.
I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think that if I really thought that my experience on Twitter was on balance a negative one, I'd stop. But look, we've had discussions about SPQR and the Roman manhole covers, and often you respond to a tweet, one responds to it, and then somebody else will come and say that was a bot. Now, I'm not very sure what a bot is. What are the bots really? And sometimes they have entirely, I think, not terribly nice, but rational conversations with me on Twitter. So, I don't think the Russians are running a bot against me. I mean, I might be wrong.
You underestimate your influence.
I might be wrong, but I think, heavens, it would be a real waste of someone's money if that was the case. So I don't know about those dark margins of it, and I suppose I've come to the conclusion that unless obviously proved otherwise, I will treat everybody as if they were a broadly rational and thinking human being. Now, at a certain point, I'm not stupid. At a certain point, when you see somebody engaging repeatedly with you, you think this is going nowhere, I'm just going to shut up. Now, whether that's because they were some really obsessive person, or whether because they were a bot, how do I know? I don't know.
Okay, and gentleman over there.
Hi, my name is Harrison. I wanted to, you mentioned sort of like trying to see non-idealised bodies in general, sort of like seeing normal bodies around. It made me think about 2 TV shows that have come out, well, one that's been renewed, but basically Sex Education and Love Island as well. So I don't know if you've seen Sex Education.
No, I haven't.
Recommend. Brilliant.
Yeah, no,
yeah, fantastic. So I was watching that, and when I was younger, when you're growing up, watching things like In-Betweeners, or sort of like standard coming-of-age stories where it's idealised relationships, it's like good-looking women and sort of like nerds, and like how does that work out? And the one thing that I thought was really amazing about Sex Education was how much normal sex and normal bodies you see on screen. And I think for the generation that is growing up watching that is phenomenal, because it's just stuff that when I was at school I don't think you would have ever come into contact with, and I think it completely changes the way we look at bodies and look at sex and look at other people. And so I guess it just sort of left me with the thought, when you look about something like Love Island, is it time for a middle-aged Love Island? Is it time for like a sort of...
Oh, God, me and Stanley Johnson, you mean? Oh, God.
Send them to Benidorm, get them in a big villa, and just have a bunch of normal people for like 2 months.
It is... I think count me out, but... but I think it's, it is right, isn't it? That this is now sounding very, very middle-aged, but my children are not that old, and it was very clear to me that 10, 15 years ago, the kind of images they were seeing were images that were false perfection, and I don't even mind naked attraction, actually. Because at least it's real people, they've, these, the male genitalia, which is of course what I look at, are just like, that's what they are. And the more you can kind of break down the boundaries of that sort of photoshopped idealism, I think, the better. And, you might not think that's the way I want to do it, but, many flowers bloom, honestly, and that probably something like sex education can have a bigger effect, on how people think than me posing nude on a BBC Two documentary, really. But it's all kind of in the same direction. Underneath, bodies are a bit odd.
I'm quite conscious of the time, and I have a couple of things I'd really like to ask you. You wrote in Women in Power that if you wrote it again, you'd defend a woman's right to be wrong. Would you just talk a little bit about that?
I mean, I don't quite know how I would do that, but I think in retrospect, looking back at the last 5-10 years of women's public voice and women's silencing, I think the worst thing I thought about it in a funny way was that women were never, ever allowed to make a mistake. And as I say, towards the end of Women in Power, the thing that really struck me was around the time of the the last election but one, was what happened to Boris Johnson and Diane Abbott after they had given car crash interviews on the radio. And, you know, Abbott had not been able to get the amount of money that was required for policing right. And she was outrageously and violently attacked everywhere. You know, not just she's made a mistake, she's not up to her brief on this, but, you know, she is not fit to be in public life, you know, just, it got worse than that. Johnson went after the election on I think the Today programme, and clearly had no clue what the Tory party manifesto had said. And, you know, people noted that, but kind of, you know, patted him on the head as if he'd been a sort of, you know, a naughty prep school boy, you know, and said, oh, be better prepared next time. And I thought, and the same, I think, happened with Clinton. You know, it clearly wasn't a brilliant idea to run your emails through whatever service you ran. It clearly wasn't a good idea, but, you know, previous secretaries of state had done that and were not thrown out to the wolves for doing that. And, you know, as soon as a woman makes an error, she just gets slaughtered. And for me, I think it's, look, when thinking about how things have changed in my lifetime, and they've got hugely better, and, you know, I'm delighted, you know, that they've got better. But deep down, the standards are quite different of what a man can do and what a woman can do. I think the same would go for race. And, you know, to some extent, class, all the kind of ways that people are not in the inner circle of the white elite male. You know, you're let in, but you dare make an error, and you're pushed out again. Whereas, you know, people like Johnson, you know, allowed to make endless errors, and he's now made so many errors that no error could possibly attack him.
There's a very real economic effect of that. So women are more likely to be less likely to be confidently wrong about investments. So, and they've proven now that women are therefore better investors because they're not confidently wrong quite as often as men. So, if you want to blame boom and bust, blame them.
The flag has gone up. Would you make it very super quick?
Yes, I have a short question. Harold Macmillan once said that people who study classics, it gives you a better insight into when people talk nonsense and when they talk something that makes sense. I wonder if your study of classics has told you that it's a better discipline than other disciplines.
I'd like to say yes. I'd really like to say yes. I think it's a very good discipline. But I think, you know, almost any subject that you study hard with analytical precision is going to do that. I think Macmillan had a vested interest, no doubt, in this, and I think classics is a very good subject. I think I want it to be more incorporating and, you know, a wider subject than it is. But, you know, actually in the end, this sounds, I'm going to end by sounding colossally old-fashioned, but I think that, you know, you learn to think by thinking hard about something. And it probably doesn't matter all that much what you think about. But you've got to learn. You have to learn thinking about something. And, you know, classics is very good, and welcome anybody to come and do it. But, you know, it could be history or anthropology or maths or whatever.
Mary, thank you so much. I have to just sort of briefly try and endeavour to sum up a bit of what you've said. First of all, thank you for coming. Thank you for undressing for the nation. As you said, we don't see it.
Say that tomorrow on Twitter, Mary.
I definitely will.
Yeah, when they say, oh my God, you know, say,
I'll be there shouting from the rooftops, because I do agree that we don't see enough of bodies over 45.
I don't do it tomorrow, I do it on the 10th, so it'll be then.
Okay. I think Harrison talked about that sort of false perfection that we tend to see, and it's so great that you're showing us a different world, the way that women can be. I loved your story about the origin of the world and how it could be called Jeanette's pussy. I'm going to call it that from now on. And you're sort of brilliant standing up for the trolls. I think your 30% success rate that I've written down is really incredibly high, and to be celebrated. And your story with Oliver Rawlings just shows you in such a good light, although I do find it a bit depressing that 7 years on you're still having to have these same conversations. But I've taken it on board that telling people just to ignore it is another form of silencing women, and I think that that's worth remembering. And I love your idea of people being taught how to read to reply to a tweet or of the social media, and that is an important life skill that we have to learn. Thank you to all of you. Keith talking about, the appeal of the otherness of classics. You liken, the off-the-peg comparisons that the media likes to make. As the media, I'm never going to do that again. Classics is like us, but fundamentally different. I've taken that on board. Bruce, a former student, to be here was really lovely of you to contribute on the power of classic. It teaches us that what we do now isn't the end. And I've taken on board that Mary's defensive position isn't defensive, that there are other pictures with a beer which is more like her. And I love the very fact that people think that you say you shouldn't do it makes you think I'm bloody well going to do it. So thank you so much for taking to our screens and joining us tonight. As I said, she will be signing books through there in the green room. Just be respectful of the fact that she hasn't got all the time in the world. And if you're not a member of Tortoise and you're interested in becoming a member of Tortoise, come and see me. I will be there through there as well. So thank you so much all for joining us. Thank you.